Hi, good morning everyone. Yes, my name's Henry Steer and I'm a chest physician in Gloucester, and I'm also lung cancer lead for Gloucester and for SWAG. So thank you, Mark, for asking me to chair this session. I'm not techie, I have to confess. I did have a ZX Spectrum like Adam, but and I did used to type in some of the things that he used to write, but that was where I kind of got stuck. So I basically just want to press buttons that work, essentially. And yeah, so it's really great to be involved in this day. And we've got a really, hopefully, interesting hour ahead of us, because I believe that we're going to confront the elephant in this session. So we've got a debate planned, and the topic of the debate is that this House believes that the NHS should embrace and encourage frontline, and I think that's an important word here, digital innovation where it occurs. And we've got two eminent speakers. Marcus Bohr is proposing the motion, and Marcus is the immediate past chair of the Royal College of GP's Health Informatics Group. And he's also been working with the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health as a lead developer and clinical safety officer on their groundbreaking digital growth charts project. He co-founded the Academy of Medical Royal College's Digital Health Group, and he's very passionate about a number of things, I'm sure, but open source in particular. And talking against the motion, although I'm sure there will be lots of areas of agreement within this, is Paul Downie, who we all know in Gloucestershire. He's one of our intensive care consultants and is our CCIO in Gloucestershire, which he's been doing since 2015. And during that time, he's overseen some big IT infrastructure projects, which are currently, we've had some big changes this week in our EPR that are revolutionising what we're doing in Gloucestershire, including the sort of PAS systems, laboratory systems, EPR. He's also a graduate of the NHS Digital Academy and a member of the Faculty of Clinical Informatics. So that's what we've got ahead of us. So I will, without further ado, pass over to Marcus.
Okay, so I'm Marcus Bohr. Thank you for the introduction. Can I just check with the people who are remote that the interference problem has gone away, because we were getting apparently mobile phone interference. I've left my phone well away. So if there's any problems, just shout out. So the proposal is the NHS should support frontline digital innovation where it occurs, and it's not surprising that I would propose that and support that view. And there's a dozen different angles that you could take as to why to support this. I've just picked one, and I'm going to go through that theme kind of thing, but hopefully during the debate we can bring out some of the others. And, you know, yes, we might get into the zone of uncomfortable debate, which I kind of like. It's a good place to be, because that's when you're really challenging everybody and having some, you know, we're not just all sitting around agreeing. So uncomfortable debate, but I actually think there will also be quite a lot of areas where we can agree. And I think that the answer is never going to be extremely to one end of the spectrum or the other. It's always, as with a lot of these things, it's going to be some degree of compromise. So, should we support frontline innovation? Yes. And this is, I guess, the kind of key thing that I'm going for is mainstream stuff doesn't always start off mainstream. And if you don't know the history of things, you might think that some of the stuff that we've got and take for granted in NHS has always been like that. So I'm just going to take you through a couple of examples of how things that are not mainstream can get to be mainstream, and also where the innovation happens in the NHS at the moment. So I'm just going to talk to you about NHS Hack Day. So this is something this is the event that got me involved into health informatics. I went to NHS Hack Day 2 in Liverpool in 2012, and that changed my life. And I got involved in health informatics through that. I met a lot of people there who are still friends now, and it really did open my eyes to not just that I was not the only person who was frustrated with my system, but that there are other people who would help me make it better. And I could meet developers for the first time and talk to them, and then over the course of a weekend, we'd build something. So that is NHS Hack Day in Cardiff I think that was 2 years ago. Just to give you an idea of the kind of collaborative environment that you get. It's just people and chairs and laptops and coffee, gradually turning the coffee into code. And it's really good fun. I would highly recommend, we are going to hopefully have NHS Hack Days again now that we've got out of the worst of the pandemic. And that environment is really helpful. Even if you do not code and have no intention of coding, it is not about being technical. It's about going with a problem. If you're a clinician or if you work inside a hospital or any other kind of healthcare environment, go and get involved. And just 2 projects that I wanted to show you here that started at an NHS Hack Day and are now mainstream. So Open Pseudonymizer was started off at NHS Hack Day, I think the first one. Julia Hippisley-Cox is the person who runs Q Research in Nottingham, and she's an eminent research GP, Professor Hippisley-Cox. And that Open Pseudonymizer work has now led to pseudonymization work, which was possible, which has enabled things like GP data for pandemic planning and research, which we've been using to manage big data, but in a pseudonymized, safe way throughout the pandemic. So not mainstream, now it's mainstream. If we didn't support that kind of stuff, if we crush it mercilessly, which is what often does happen, then these things will not exist in the future. And the other one, OpenBNF, was produced by a couple of my mates to shame the BNF into producing something that was more easily accessible, because at the time there was really very poor digital access to the BNF. They built an OpenBNF by scraping data illegally from the BNF online, putting it into an app, and then went to the BNF and said, there you go, you've got an app there. Not because they were going to make any money out of it. They didn't have, they absolutely had no intention of doing anything with it other than making the political point. And then they walked away from it. And now the BNF has got its own apps. Mainstream. Open Eyes. This is an open source ophthalmology platform that was built by Bill Aylward, who now is retired, but he at the time was working at Moorfields Eye Hospital as a consultant ophthalmologist. He built this in his spare time. It's now mainstream. Moorfields sell it as a product. He has now bought a yacht and moved on. But this just shows you how only a clinician, I think, really could understand the detail required in an ophthalmology user interface to make it so that you can drag and drop the elements of the things that you did during the operation and the things that you left inside the person's eye. And that is all SNOMED coded for you by the application. It's just genius, right? Mainstream. But if you kill it, you will kill it, okay? And this is the best example, the oldest example. Does anyone know what that stands for? Yeah. Have anyone been to Egton? It's on the way to Whitby. If you're driving from sort of from North Yorkshire up towards Whitby or to Robin Hood's Bay, you go past Egton. And David Stables and his colleagues were GPs, and they started in the late 80s. They worked all through the 90s to make this niche system, which was only in one practice. And at the time, in that era, there was estimates that my colleagues estimate that there were hundreds of small GP systems. And gradually, some of them were better than others. Some of them had no intention of taking it commercially. And so you had a kind of dropout rate, and gradually you get a smaller and smaller market, to the point now where EMIS has basically the entire, the 57% of the UK market is EMIS now. So that's the original EMIS LV, which is a text-based system. And in fact, I couldn't get screenshots of the original one, which was green screen. This is the Windowsed version of that. And that's EMIS now, 57% of the UK GP market with EMIS Web. Mainstream. And there are lots of other examples that exist, but some of them have been mentioned already today, so there's lots out there. I'm going to just shoot all these bullets because I don't like doing kind of PowerPoint striptease. But I just thought I'll throw out some ideas about how we actually enable that to be embraced. I think probably the top one is the first and most important for an organisation to take on, which is have a willingness to support new ideas and make that obvious within the organisation. Advertise that within the organisation that you want to hear about new ideas, because one of the main things I hear from people who've been trying to do something within an organisation is that they can't even find the right person to go and talk to. All these slides are online already. The link is in the first slide, actually, so I'll go back to that first slide. So I won't go through step by step because I don't want to use too much time. But long and short of it for me is this bottom one, which is partly obscured by the... But learning about open source is the single most important step for me. Even if you have no intention of making your software open source. But I think the thing that I come up against most when I talk to people is lack of understanding of what open source even is. And that lack of understanding means that they believe things that are not true about open source. And that means that they then have an opinion about open source that is based on not true things. So I actually would encourage each and every one of you to actually go away and try and start from scratch learning about open source. And if you can even play around with a bit of code, that helps. But by no means is it necessary for people to be a coder to understand what's happening with open source. Open source is really parallel to generic drugs, in my view. We have proprietary drugs which are branded and we pay very high prices for. And then over time, there's a trickle-down effect where those drugs become generics. Now, sadly, because drugs are patented and software is copyrighted, and those are two very different laws, it means that we can't rely on the trickle-down patent expiry effect to make things open source. So you've got to understand it, grok open source, get involved in it, and make sure that stuff becomes open source from the start. Otherwise, there will be no generic software ever in the future, and we cannot afford a fully proprietary software future. So that's everything from me, and I'll hand over to my colleague who's going to counter the argument.
Should I introduce myself while we're waiting? Because I'm not particularly technical either. So my response has been described. I'm the CCIO from Gloucestershire. I'm in the local patch here. There are 3 CCIOs in the patch at the moment. There is myself, who's at the Acute Trust, and there is obviously an ICS that's just about to be formed. So there's a CCIO in the ICS, and there's also one of the Gloucestershire Health and Care Services, which is the other organisation within the patch. Yes, so it's quite clearly a curveball that's been thrown at me here. If you honestly think, I've just come from an ITU ward round and I'm going back to finish it in a minute. So I am a frontline clinician. Okay, there's not any blood on me now, but there could easily have been. Okay, so I'm a frontline clinician. So I'm not going to argue against that. That was quite clearly set up to fail. So let's be absolutely clear. But it absolutely highlights a really important point. And the fact is that, so this is a false flag, yeah? So we've described the elephant in the room, but we haven't described the elephant. We've been talking about what the elephant might be, but no one really knows. And we know it's really big, but we can't articulate what it is. And this is the major problem about, as I see, implementation of healthcare, but actually even broader than that. And it's about defining the problem. So before I was a clinician in Gloucestershire, I worked in Malawi for 4 years. What we call development aid, patronisingly from the north then, is exactly the same as what we call digital transformation now. Okay, it is all the same thing, and it's all about implementing change and making change stick, because it's very easy to drop something in there and then walk away and it doesn't stick. So therefore pilots, all these things we're going to talk about in a minute, are all great, and the innovation and enthusiasm is absolutely fantastic, and we need to garner that, but you've got to get from that to the next step. And that's what you'll find. That's why innovation hubs are set up around universities, because it's very easy to do that first bit. Well, it's not easy to do that first bit, but we're good as a UK at doing the first bit. Generally, we're not so good as doing the second bit. Yeah, and that's why we've got to do that, and we've got the opportunity with the university here, with the collaboration with the hospitals, to actually start to develop that forward. And this is where that is the elephant in the room. So this quite clearly, if you can see here, there's some topical references to this talk you'll see as we go along. Is this is a false flag? So this is supposed to be Ukrainian soldiers who are also Nazis and are also got a NATO flag there because they want to be in NATO. So I'm not going to talk to you about that, but I'm going to change the motion, and I'm going to propose that the motion should be something more akin to this. That this House believes that the frontline should build upon digital innovation where it occurs. So same words in a slightly different order, but have a different context. So why is that important? Okay, so first of all, I've explained who I am, an intensive care consultant, and therefore I look after all patients, or all sources, anyone who's not a neonate, effectively, I look after at some point. So I'm going to do a bit of an experiment, and I'm not convinced whether we can do it online as well, but I will describe it. So first of all, bear in mind this is a Cancer Alliance meeting. If I can everybody put their hand up who looks after patients of some description that are affected by cancer. Put your hand up. Okay. Right, so good. So for those, you probably won't see this out and about. For those at home, there's probably about 10 or 12 of us probably in the room at the moment. Okay, so I want you to keep your hand up. It would be nice if we had the hands up on the screen, but I don't think we can get that as well. Okay, so then if we then go to the next, so who also looks after patients? So who's a data scientist? Okay, so what am I describing here? So this is the scourge of all AI. This is a local minima. Yeah? Okay, so for those that don't know, so when you train an AI algorithm, you land from Mars about where you are. You don't know what the right or wrong answer is, but you define a loss function, and you try to make the loss function as low as it goes. And that's what that's here. Now, depending where you are light, because it's random, you start to go down one of these things until you hit the bottom. Yeah. If you just stick it at the lower bottom one there, you don't know whether that was the global minimum, or whether it was a local minimum. It's exactly the same here. We have to decide as a healthcare community where we put our limited resources to make the maximum benefit or the lowest loss across the whole piece. And if we focus just in one place at the exclusion of something else, we get So we've got to have a strategy. Okay, so I am quite colourful in my language, and I apologise for swear words as we go along. And one of the swear words that lots of people hate is vision statements. I hate it, but I'm going to use it here. So you've got to have a vision. Okay, how do you describe the vision? Because it's all about communication and understanding. Okay, so this actually comes from HIMSS, which we'll talk about in a minute, but this is the vision that is our local population need to be well and healthy. I don't think anyone could dispute that, okay? But how do you articulate that, where we are on that, and whether we're getting better or getting worse, and whether we're focusing the resources in the right place or the wrong place? That's much harder. Now, as a commercial organisation, HIMSS, you may or may not have heard of, they provide tools. I have no financial benefit of any of the companies that I have interactions with, but HIMSS is a tool that most people use, and there's lots of variations of different tools. The one that most people talk about is ERAM, which is in the middle of that bit down there, which is the acute one. But there are other tools out there, and our local ICS and the hospitals are looking at various other tools here to try and define where we are on these grades. And in fact, NHS Digital, NHSX are actually very keen on these things, and that a lot of the funding in the next year is coming to try to get people to a bare minimum of a HIMSS ERAM score of 4 to 5. So that's how you define that. But I also want to describe something below that, which is the boring bit. And this is when people talk about hacks and all those other things like that. That is cool and funky. He's cool and funky to me. He's got his cool top, his top knot and stuff like that. Where I'm sitting here in my scabby scrubs, yeah. And I can't compete. And I can't compete against that. But what I can tell you at the bottom here is governance and workforce comes at the very bottom, and it's boring and dull, but it's the stuff that you have to do before. before you go on to something else. So you've got to define your strategy. This is our strategy, and we're aiming to get to HIMSS level 6 as soon as we possibly can. They're the reasons for why you might want to do it. But patient's perspective or care provider's perspective, they're all written down there. I'm not going to go through the bits and pieces. But there is this complete misunderstanding, and I think this probably is the elephant in the room, is the fact is we are tarred by this horrible Kafkaesque nightmare that was MP Fit. Where the NHS from the centre absolutely dictated exactly what was going to happen, dictated what the product was going to be, and it just didn't work. It was a big disaster. But what we can't do is go to the complete other end of the spectrum and go to the Wild West and look at constant pilot studies where there's no real traction. You get a pilot study here, you get a pilot study there. You're not going anywhere. You're rediscovering the same problems with none of the real solutions. So there has to be somewhere in the middle that we go to. And the way that we do it is that we have a strategy. But we define the solution. Again, another swear word. I hate Steve Jobs. I'm not an Apple person at all. Another swear word that offends me, Steve Jobs. But he had an absolute point here. It's about articulating the problem, and it's articulating the problem across all stakeholders. And it's not just the people because the problem with pilots is that people tend to sit on the top and say, I've defined the problem, the problem that I can see, and I will engage in some people, and we'll make that top part look absolutely beautiful. Yeah, we'll make it gleamingly beautiful. The problem is, so all these other stuff in here. This slide is not particularly brilliant because it gives you other bits and pieces of which I'm not going to draw attention to. But the whole point is that if you just focus on the top end, you completely miss and you have to have all the stakeholders involved in the hill. This is our current map of all our data that comes in and out of our hospital. There's probably in excess of 500,000 messages going through the hospital in one day. It is a huge amount of wires and stuff that's going underneath the surface. And where is the busiest part of all this? The busiest part is all around here on this side. And these are all the individual apps and little individual bits of information that we are going around, whizzing around. Now I see, so when this was presented before in the college here by the IT guys, and they show that this is clever. They like this. This is good. This scares the heebie-jeebies out of me. I'm a clinician. I'm responsible as a CIO for every single piece of information that's going around that system. Ones and noughts. Yeah, I've got no idea what it is. I can't interrogate it. The context is coming out of one bit, going into another bit there. Someone's going to reuse it there. Once data gets out there, you've got no idea who's going to use it. And the provenance and what it's used for is really, really important. So the more that goes on, the more apps, the more interconnectedness and stuff like that, I lose control and I'm responsible for it all. So what we've got to try and do is we try and bring those things together. And that if we just focus on the next app that comes along or the next bit of innovation, and we don't build it on top of what we've already got, I'm not, again, did an MBA, so I also hate the whole of the swear words. Kaizen is another horrible swear word that I don't like, but it's Japanese. But it does describe all coming together and building on the top of what we've already got, and not keep on going back to the start again and going backwards up, because you don't get anywhere if you just keep on reinventing the wheel. So how do I know it works? I know that if we all come together and collaborate together and focus on the things that will make the organisation better, we will move from the HIMSS level scores. So this is the trust in 2019. And this is where we are as of about a couple of weeks ago. And as Henry says, we've just launched some of the EPA for the EPMR. Sorry, say it again. We've just launched some of the EPR stuff for the doctors. So we are slowly moving up these levels. But we have come from, in the Gloucestershire, we've come from a very low base. And we've got to get all this hardcore stuff sorted before we can kick on to the next level. So I go back to just about on time. So I go back to the point. So I totally agree that innovation needs to be driven from the front line. But the front line and the below surface people need to work together and work from what we've already got, rather than throw the baby out of the bathwater. I'll stop there.
The structure of this is we've just got an opportunity now for Marcus to come back with anything he wants to pick up from that, and then we will open the debate to questions from the floor.
I think Paul gets, it's 5 minutes each, and Paul gets to
Well,
reply to that.
yeah.
If you want to.
If you want to.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I think I agree that we are agreeing in that nobody wants the Wild West. What I think is interesting is what do we mean by the Wild West? And I was at the Digital Health Rewired show over the last couple of days, so Tuesday, Wednesday this week. And actually a lot of the stuff that I saw there from mainstream suppliers who are have a stand at a trade show essentially, was the Wild West. Actually, what I saw there was stuff that doesn't necessarily reflect good clinical need and doesn't necessarily reflect clinical safety. So a lot of talk about things like artificial intelligence. And so I sort of think that whilst we've got a spectrum of, from on one end of things, what you might call orthodox health informatics done right kind of thing, and you've got this lockdown NP fit style of command and control centralization, and on the other side we've got the straw man of kind of Walter Mitty characters and Hack Days and the Wild West. But I think it's multi-axial, because you can definitely find yourself in a position where very authoritative, respected organizations have bought into total drivel. And I do worry that our AI will actually be one of those things that will not just fail to deliver for medicine, but I think it will be, if it's believed in too much, it will actually result in some serious incidents of harm, because the people who are implementing AI are doing so on the basis of its hype and not necessarily because they know anything about it. When you speak to people who know a lot about AI, they're actually very guarded about its abilities. And they don't make sweeping generalizations that you might hear from someone like Ali Parsa, who's the CEO of Babylon Health, who will tell you sweeping generalizations about AI and how amazing it is. So I think that I like the model of having sort of a mental model of the spectrum between tight command and control, no control whatsoever, but I think it's multi-axial, and we do need, as a community, to be quite aware of that. Coming back to the idea briefly, and I'll finish on this, of just some allegory that might help you sort of see how we might support local digital innovation better, and perhaps the things that we're not doing, for example. And I like drawing analogies between different things, because I think it sometimes helps us understand what's happening. And one of them is, if you were a surgeon and you develop a new surgical instrument, so this is not a digital thing, you develop a new surgical instrument, and you ask for permission to start using this in your operations. Now, that is a thing that has happened successfully in the past. I mean, I spent a long time working in Wigan Infirmary, which is where they invented the hip replacement. And that object must have at some point been machined by Mr. Charnley, who invented them. And he had to take that along to the hospital and say, I want to put this in person, please. Now, at that point, quite reasonably, anybody with an eye on standards will say, well, it's going to have to be sterile. And he says, OK, well, can I put this through the hospital sterilization services department and have it, sterile to my theatre? And they must have at some point have said yes. Compare that with a digital innovator right now who says, I've built this thing. This is my reasoning behind it. This is the need. This is how it works. It's open source. It's shareable. It could potentially save us time, money. It can be used in other trusts. And quite reasonably, the IT team or the hospital's more senior management will say, well, it needs to be hosted on premise and it needs to be secure. Reasonable. And he'll then reply, okay, well, can I use your data center? No. Will you help me make it secure? No. That's the kind of help they get at the grassroots from digital when you are a digital innovator in most trusts. And I hope that there are exceptions, and I know that there are exceptions. But that comparison is what I want you to take away. Let's change that.
but I'm not going to dispute any of that. I mean, we're absolutely on the same page. Yeah, it is. It was always going to be us because you've got two frontline clinicians. But the important thing to say is absolutely right, but it requires the interaction, and I think where it comes is about where people are on the roadmap, on the journey. If you come to say, I want to deploy AI now in our organisation in acute trust, it's clearly a joke because we haven't got that information there, but there is the pipeline to get that information and it will come forward. So when things at the right time. I think the important thing in IT is it's not now, it's not no, never. It's often not now, and that's a very difficult thing to get across to people. Is to say Mark was describing his interactions with our EPR in our system here, and the answer is yes. We'd love Mark to get involved, but at the moment we had to get the grassroots in there with which to get the bits and pieces sorted. So to make sure that every patient has been clerked in the hospital. And is seen within 14 hours by a consultant sounds boring, but we weren't at that level. But I can tell you now, as of this week, I can now see that metrics, and I can start to see that I can drive change. So yeah, absolutely, the lung cancer pathway, it has to be, and it will be done. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It is generic. All these things that you discovered, the respiratory team here saying it's a very long, complicated pathway. Absolutely, but it's not unique. Almost all the problems that we sort of identify in healthcare are almost generic, and they can be tweaked and layered upon it all. So back to the step ladder, the Kaizen is, but if we just start with individual projects and stay on a project basis, we will never get anywhere. And we have to bring it to strategy. We have a trust strategy. That means that it's an EPR first strategy. And if we can't deploy through whatever reason that the system doesn't allow you to do that, then absolutely we're not averse to other things, but we need to try it in the systems that we've already got, layer on top of that, rather than throw the baby out of the bathwater.
Thank you. So perhaps if you both just stand up here. So we've got a bit of time for questions from the floor and the audience. If we've got any questions coming up, then just let me know. I'm just going to start. So Paul, obviously we have a collaborative group here from around the network and locally and nationally. And what you're obviously describing is what we need to do in our trust and to build things within the framework you've put up and make sure it's safe within the trust. What I'm struggling to get my head around is how we marry up those two things and how easy it might be to have resource or programs that are can be applied to multiple trusts but can be implemented within the specific frameworks and parameters that each trust require. So that to me is something I'm still struggling.
That's right, and that is the elephant in the room. So but the solution has already been prescribed, whether we like it or not. The solution has been the ICSs have been, and they are accountable organisations, and the funding goes through those, and then they do the strategy. Once you start to get people coming in from elsewhere, it is just disruptive, and that's what whether I'm not. Whether it's open source, whether it's this or whether I'm agnostic. What I want is, as a practice clinician, I want the benefits that I know that digital can provide us with to be deployed as quickly as possible. If we have random strategies with different people coming from different directions, all I know from my lived experience that gets you nowhere. So I heard about the virtual wards, absolutely. So there's a massive directive from NHS Digital with absolute tangible things that have to be delivered by a certain period of time. So that will get done. I've been sitting in project meetings where all those metrics that we've described are already on the radar and will get delivered because it was done in the way that the NHS is designed to work. So for the cancer services here, so the ICS strategy, digital strategy, is being written right now. So this needs to be moved up and moved to the ICS level. And there are ICS members already up here represented. So that they need to be lobbied. You need to lobby and get it on the strategy. But what you can't do is knock on a door, decide that for whatever reason the door's not open, and then go off elsewhere because it doesn't get anywhere. It frustrates everybody and it wastes resources, unfortunately.
Adam.
Sort of to Marcus, really, it's about how do you manage innovation. I mean, there's an awful lot of innovators, and a lot of things end up going down a rabbit hole, they end up nowhere. So, for example, in our trust, we had a fantastic gynae surgeon developed an NDT management platform. It was fantastic, and the thing was, because it was home delivered, if the specialist nurse said, I want a button on it to do a referral automatically, the next week he could put it in. Yeah. But the trouble is, it wasn't scalable. It didn't link with the EPR, you didn't have any backing behind it, and so it was down a rabbit hole. So how do you manage all, because you can have 30 innovators, very intelligent doctors or nurses in your trust who all want to do a little project, or they've spoken to a company who wants to do a project, but you can't do them all, and most of them will either be achieved by something the ICS is already going to do or going to procure, or is going to end up nowhere. But there are a few nuggets which might be useful, like if this RPA for the cancer pathway manages to integrate with the EPR and get some support, it could work, but it's risky. How do you manage it?
Well, I think that first line of my bullet points thing about being very open about the fact that you want to see innovation, and what that would enable you to do is to curate the totality of the ideas that are out there. So, as you said, there might be 30 clinicians with an idea. You bring them all in and you be friends with them and you give them the best opportunity to make their idea the best it can be. It also means that they all meet each other at that stage. So there's a cross-pollination of ideas, and that means that then if you are in a position of only being able to select 2 out of 30 ideas, you aren't seen as being a brick wall that resists 28 of what people think of as my idea, my pet idea was destroyed, and I know of all the other 28 where they will. You can actually demonstrate that no, you have had a sort of curation process around that, and you've made friends with all 30 people and their ideas, and for now we're just selecting these 2. But it also means that it's never really like no, nay, never, no, never, no more, which I thought you were about to burst into, seasonally. But it's not never, it's not saying never, it's saying not right now. So you can then start to develop those people, because we know from the startup world and commerce in general that your first idea is not necessarily the idea that takes you all the way to, a venture capital success. So that first idea that gets knocked back, if you keep those people in your little pool of talent and you carry on working with them, their next idea might be better.
It would be nice if the innovators then came into the tent to sort of help develop some of the internal stuff. But some innovators are very wedded to their own little project, and if that gets knocked back, they go, well,
I think the whole reason that a lot of this innovation, and I will use the hazard quotes there, because not all of it is helpful. A lot of it exists because it's a symptom of the poor systems that people are having to use. So when you're an intelligent person having to use a bad system, you will sit there going, well, I could learn to code and I could read faster. So I think as systems get better, there will be less pressure that drives people to start developing feral systems and homegrown systems. And then hopefully what we'll be left with is more the stuff that is more genuinely innovation. It's not just fixing bad stuff. It's more like this is a genuinely new idea. And yes, if you can keep those people in the tent and curate those minds and also give them the feeling that this is welcome. Because I think everywhere that I've worked in the NHS, sadly, and tried to do some even non-digital quality improvement work, you still hit an enormous amount of resistance with it. And so creating a sort of club of innovators at least makes them feel a little bit more appreciated, and that this isn't them being crushed for whatever perceived difference they have. It's actually just maybe this idea isn't the right one now. The other thing you can do is you can get them involved in the projects that you do green light So you can say, look, we can't do your project now, but would you like to get involved in this one, which we are doing this year? And again, NHS Hack Day as a community was great for me in that regard, just feeling like I'm not the only one who's grinding the teeth away from a PC at work, you know.
Okay.
I'm not the only one.
Can I just come back? Yeah, I think that's yeah. So I think this is the difficult bit. This is the elephant in the room. And interesting that you said adventure to capital success, because I don't think that's a definition of it. But I think that's part of the problem. Is there is a very well worn and recognised way to innovate. You innovate, micro innovate. You then have venture capitals that pump prime that, and it gets bigger. But most of the innovation, let's be honest, is then gobbled up by the Googles and the Apples of this world. So that is success. And I can tell you what then happens is that your code that you beautifully coded is soon gobbled, scrunched up, and actually it becomes their code and it's different. So I think there's a misunderstanding of what the normal innovation channels are, and actually it gets hoovered up and it gets deployed at scale by the big companies. These companies are M&A, another swear word, mergers and acquisitions people. They're not really innovators. They're long since left that game by. Silicon Valley doesn't innovate anymore. You know, it's long since gone that. They just hoover up stuff. So I think you've got to be honest about that. It's a model, but it doesn't work in a non-commercial setting, which is like the NHS, and that is the challenge. Totally agree.
Well,
come back to your point, how do you identify the winners? Take your use case. It was clearly already a success. It was being used. You had this fantastic responsive person. So how do you identify how you take that forward? Well, you've already identified it. You know that it works. How do you fix it? You make sure you have an institutional capability that can take on and nurture that idea internal, that cross-cuts from IMT and all the rest of it, so that you don't have a bus factor of one with your developers. I think it's not that.
I suppose the problem in this case, it wasn't scalable, and it was going to be subsumed by the EPR.
In the sense not scalable.
Well, because the EPR was going to take over and do it most of it anyway, not as well, but we can talk about it.
Maybe just come back to your point. That's how, in principle, I'll take away the particularities of the case. That's how you would take that on. You could easily identify what's winning in your in the services because people are using it and rave about it. And what you want to do is take the ones particularly that become where you can make them more generalisable and you nurture them internally. And that internal nurturing, I think we fail in very much within our NHS trusts to be able to take those ideas and then bring those disciplines, all those boring bits, which is absolutely critical. But at the moment, the innovators within our trust, me included, can't get access to the boring bits, don't get support for the boring bits. We want support for it, but we either have our doors being slammed in our faces,
and how,
or we don't know who to talk to because they're completely invisible.
So how much of that is, I mean, the other elephant in the room is resource, isn't it? We've spoken about this, IT resourcing, who they are snowed under, they're completely under-resourced compared to other comparable sized organisations. They don't have time to do these innovative projects. So I suppose we have resource in this room, don't we? Because we've got all these people doing this because they're passionate about it. So how do we marry up this extra resource that we have to the existing, IT structures and garner the energy and if you like, it's not quite free, but it's almost free resource and bring that within the fold.
Well, and I think
come back on that point quickly. A lot of it requires cultural change in the IMT department. As I think Mark pointed out, or someone pointed out earlier on, a lot of it being set up to keep the lights on and keep things running. And there needs to be, and to be fair, things have moved on a reasonable amount, but a cultural change so that the IMT departments also think and also want to support that kind of thing. Part of their change of vision, use that dirty word again, I hate it a lot, is that we're not only here to keep the lights on and develop it, we're also here to support and nurture our own internal software and digital processes.
I take all that, absolutely, but I do believe there has been a quantum change after the pandemic. So I honestly do believe that digital is just about to come its age. Perhaps I'm naive, but I honestly do believe that we have certainly locally. We have been in the backwater for a long time. We started to move forward, and the pandemic came at a very good time for digital. And the amount of investment that went into digital then started to deliver stuff. I think locally we have an opportunity with which to do that. I really do. But to describe about the how you define it, so you can, there is the construct, isn't there, about a clinician sits with a developer and you do rapid prototyping. Yeah, that is a model which people talk about. The problem about that is it's difficult for that to be scaled, and therefore it's about as I said before, defining the problem. If you write out the pseudocode level, or you write at the problem definition level, that stuff can be recycled much easier across organizations and stuff like that, and you can move it from the bespoke app into the EPR. Okay, it's never going to be like for like, but it's about defining the layers. Talk about layers in IT all the time, doesn't it? If you play at the noughts and ones levels, it's going to be very difficult for that to be replicated and to be anodized and moved forward. If you talk at the higher levels, higher level languages, pseudocode up to problem definitions, then those things are tangible and can be shared. And a lot of these EPRs are shareable. We've pitched all kinds of stuff from other trusts that have already got it. So I don't think there's this artificial distinction about bolt down massive EPRs and the small individual spokes, but there's bits in the middle, and that's, I think we're all agreeing where we need to be, and there will be subtle differences, but we all need to work together, work on the tools that we've got locally rather than recreating the wheel.
Okay, we just have time for one last question because we started late. Is there an online question? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm Nicola Davis. My business intelligence colleagues in the room are interested in one version of the truth and how we maintain innovation whilst ensuring that we still retain that single version.
I guess I want to know, what do they mean by one version of the truth? They mentioned business intelligence, so are they meaning that this is a kind of an app, whilst all this stuff is changing, the analytics of the organisation remains the same?
I presume they mean that not having multiple individual small bits of software that operate separately, but bringing it all under a single umbrella.
Haven't expanded on it.
Yes, so that is one of the challenges, isn't it? So this is where there are, again, back to layers. NHS, I mean, the only way we're going to talk together, if you go back to that complicated spaghetti diagram, either it's going to land in one big repository, which is the single source of truth, but how it gets there is equally important. So if I'm talking in bananas and you're talking in apples, it all gets scrambled along the way. And if you've got multiple apps so even if they are in the end coming into one final source of truth, you've got the information that's going to go in, it might get transformed and it might go out again. So it's about controlling and understanding. And yes, so I thought we were going to get onto fire. So the solution to everything is fire. But that's again, I'm glad you're shaking your head because that is naive. The definition of whether you can define all these data points and give all the context that's there to make it safe to be able to run that information is a big aspect. It's a lovely idea. I don't disagree with it, but it is a generation away before we get to that sort of level of understanding. So if you have something in a siloed information there and you can't get at that information, that's lost information to those other people. That's why I got involved in it. I'm an intensive care consultant. I look at, as I said, all these different patients, different places. I can't go in to the oncology MDT, so I can't see that. I don't know whether this patient is terminal or whether that. I can't see any of that. I can't go into the chemo care system because I don't know what chemotherapy they're going. So having it all accessible for everybody and not having artificial barriers is really important. And the single source of truth is the only way you can do it, because you're looking at it, you can see it. If you look elsewhere and look in one system, you only get half the information, you don't know the relevance.
Marcus, do you want to just finish and then we'll stop?
I think so. If we're talking about single source of clinical truth, then it's entirely technically possible to have different views of that single source of truth. And I think if in the case of the app that Adam mentioned, where there was it needed to be able to eventually needed to be able to store its data in the EPR, and I think that is the desirable state of affairs. Where you can make that happen, that's what should happen. so that you do end up with a source of truth. But it actually doesn't preclude the possibility of having different views for different clinical groups and different professional groups, so that people doing analytics at trust level can see certain things in certain ways, and an individual clinician caring for a patient in clinic will see the same data from the same source but differently. I think that's, if we can't do that, then I think we certainly can't do artificial intelligence with that way. So if we are not sophisticated enough to be able to ensure semantic preservation of the data between an app and the EPR and then back out into another view, then we should not be unleashing AI on these kind of systems either, because the AI will misinterpret things based on exactly that semantic misinterpretation. So, yeah, different views, I think, is what we should be going for at that level at least.
Okay, we are over time. It is lunchtime. So thank you very much. Thank you to Paul and Marcus.